All right, what's going on, y'all? Happy Monday. Hopefully, everybody's staying warm today. We'll get started here in just a minute. Let some more people kind of file on in, but appreciate y'all for joining on such short notice. I keep saying that I'm going to do a better job of planning these out, but truthfully, it's sort of spur in the moment. So I appreciate you all for staying patient. So we'll wait for a couple more people to hop in. Let's see. Chris, what's up, man? Dylan. Yeah, I can go by Dylan today. All right. I'm not really in the mood to wait any longer. Let's go ahead and get started. Pull this up real quick. Make sure I have the sponsors ready. All right. All right. Let's get started. All right. Here we go. The major storyline ahead of the 2024 college football season is the expanded 12-team playoff. Main question for Louisville fans, how likely is it that the Cardinals land in the final 12 that will compete for the national championship? Well, we will look at both sides of the equation on today's episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Happy Monday. Welcome into another live edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase medical.com. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. As I mentioned, main storyline ahead of next year's college football season, the newly expanded 12-team playoff. Main question for Louisville fans, how likely is it that the Cardinals end up in the playoff? We're going to sort of dive into that question. We'll talk about how the team can make the playoff, what could hold them back, and the overall realistic outlook. So some people will say, dude, it's January 15th. Why are we talking about a season that is 8 months away or 7 months away? First of all, it is never too early to talk about college football. Unfortunately, we have a long ways to go before that season opener against Austin Peay. But with all of the great news from the transfer portal that the Cardinals have been elite at addressing, one of the best transfer portal classes yet again, it's becoming extremely encouraging in terms of the outlook for next season. And I think that, with how the basketball team sort of hasn't been playing all that great, they're 6-10 on the season. Portal news is starting to slow down a little bit. Got to start talking about something. Let's talk about the future. Let's continue to get excited about football. There's no time to turn that excitement off. But 2024 playoff, obviously we are entering the most uncharted of waters that we have experienced as college football fans because of the opportunity at hand. We've never had a situation to where there have been 12 teams legitimately competing for a national championship, or at least having the chance to do so. College football has been one of, if not the only sport to not have a traditional style of single game elimination. Now there has been the 4-team playoffs, which I guess was a step in the right direction, but we're going from 2 teams to 4 teams now to 12 in the coming months. So there's a great amount of opportunity. Chris mentions playoffs could be very interesting with all the coaching changes. 100%. There's a couple reasons why I think Louisville could make the 2024 playoff. There's pretty much 2, I suppose. Portal and opportunity/schedule. Now, there's no secret that the Cardinals lost some key pieces from this year's team. You lost Jawar Jordan, Isaac Garendo, Jamari Thrash, Brian Hudson, Willie Tyler, some good pieces on that offense. And then the defense, Jarvis Brownlee is gone, Cam Kelly, Stephen Herron. But you return a good amount of the defense. So I guess you could say at this point, roster retention in the portal. Now, there is the obvious prerequisite to this argument. That's operating under the assumption that, you're not going to have any major players on the team enter the portal between now and August, which I understand that still is possible because nothing is impossible in the current transfer portal realm. But roster retention and the transfer portal. And at this point, Louisville is one of the best portal winners of the offseason yet again. They have done a great job of addressing the needs. They have overall added more talent to the roster. I would argue that on paper, this year's roster or the current roster for next year is better than the one in 2023. I think another year for Brohm's system to be implemented. Something you cannot overlook is just the natural progression within the system that the Louisville players could ultimately, at the end of the day, be able to grow in and be put into a situation to where you feel pretty good about, the way the team is progressing. The other portion of this that I feel like really could play to a benefit, but it also could hurt Louisville depending on how you look at it. And we'll talk about why it can hurt here coming up shortly, but it can help because on the schedule, you don't have a juggernaut. I mean, you have some tough teams. There's some tough road games at Notre Dame, at Kentucky, which has been the team's Achilles heel. I think SMU is going to be a tough game. Miami could end up being tough. You never know. At Clemson's going to be challenging. Jacksonville State, mid-major, or not mid-major, but non-Power 5 team that could throw a wrench in the Cardinals' plans. The schedule lacks a true juggernaut team. You don't have to play Florida State again. You don't have a tremendous SEC out-of-conference team that Louisville has traditionally played early on in the season, first game of the year. So there's the opportunity that way. And, well, the bottom line is there's 12 spots instead of 4. So mathematically, you have a chance. And I want to reiterate where the Cardinals were going into the final game of the season. You're sitting at 10-1. And I understand to get to 10-1, a lot of stuff has to happen, in the right way. And will that happen in 2024? You never know. But there is a possible opportunity to get to that level. And I bring up that point to suggest that Louisville was right there, maybe on the outside looking in for the 4-team playoff. But if they would have beaten Kentucky and you're sitting there at 11-1 and you had the 12-team playoff, the Cardinals have a chance at going to the national championship game. Now, it's going to be tough because you have to play some very good teams. And at the end of the day, we're about getting to the playoff. And then everything after that, obviously, I feel like the team is playing with house money. But Robert mentions playoffs bound for Louisville. Hope so. Very interesting opportunity for the Cards. And I want to see how, the rankings progress and how Louisville can be able to build off of a solid 2023 season. Now, the way that the year ended poses some questions. And I think that those questions introduce real concerns and limitations that could hold this team back, both in their control and out of their control. And that's the main thing to focus on. In the next segment, there's 3 things that could hurt Louisville in terms of a playoffs opportunity: schedule, perception, and scheme. All 3 kind of stand alone, but they all play within each other as well. So we'll talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs first round is close to ending. The NFL regular season is obviously over, but it's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays, the new Explore tab, Parlay Hub, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. 3 things can hold the Cardinals back from making the playoff in 2024. And I know that the rosters aren't finalized, and there still might be some more coaching changes. And Louisville could have an addition to the team that could make them more likely of a candidate to be in the playoff, or something can happen, a departure that could make them less likely. But at this point, it seems like the roster is probably about 90% complete. The schedule, we already know who's on the schedule. If you have any questions or comments, let me know in the YouTube comments. Drop down what you believe is going to be the main thing that could hold the Cardinals back from making the playoff in 2024. I'm very interested to hear what you all have to say. Also, just want to hear from you all in general. I like having these live editions of the show because it gives me an opportunity to interact with the listeners in the comment section. And just a great opportunity for, I feel like, myself and for the listeners. So 3 things I mentioned that could hold this team back. Number 1, as much as it can be a boost, it can also hurt. That is the schedule. We saw what happened with Florida State. 13-0 didn't make the playoffs. So this plays into the perception aspect of things, is that the viewpoint and perception of the ACC has never been lower. The SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 are the 3 conferences to be in, and the Cardinals, albeit, are in a conference that is better than most give them credit for, but still doesn't get that national love or perception. Now, if Louisville's 11-1, I don't foresee an opportunity to where they're kept out of the playoff. But if they're sitting there at 10-2, maybe even 9-3, then you're really going to start to hit a level of opposition from the national perception that could hurt you. Now, schedule-wise, I imagine that the strength of schedule is probably going to be better than last year, but it's not going to be at the top of the strength of schedule list or rankings. You have some solid games on the road. I think that Louisville's schedule on paper is going to be more challenging than people give it credit for. People are already saying, well, Louisville's schedule is easy again. I would probably argue that it's not easy because of the road games that are on the schedule. You have at Notre Dame, you have at Kentucky, at Clemson. You're going to play an SMU team that, let me go ahead and tell you all, the Mustangs are going to be ranked for a good portion of next season. Miami, who knows, with Cam Ward, could end up being a very, very good team. I don't necessarily know about Stanford and Virginia, Georgia Tech, Boston College, Pitt, still to be determined. But you have Notre Dame, you have Kentucky, you have some solid teams that you're going up against. And I think that can definitely play to your disadvantage, because as favorable as the schedule might be, it's not a cupcake schedule. It's respectable enough to where you can lose games if you're not careful. But it's not as strong enough, and as it's not perceived to be as tough enough to maybe warrant getting the benefit of the doubt, getting the final nod in the 9-12 range because you're 10-2. I don't think 9-3 would probably get you in. It might possibly, but I think 10-2 with this schedule would definitely be grounds to get you in the playoff, or 10-3 even if you lost that ACC championship game. But who knows? You were 10-1 in the 9th spot and you lost and dropped down to 14. So you could argue that the Cardinals would have to only lose 1 game to get a chance, and who knows? So the schedule and the perception definitely, I feel like, can hold this team back and could be serving as a limitation to them for the 2024 season. The third aspect of this that I want to look at is scheme. And that sort of is the elephant in the room, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And I guess you really could say offense as well. But defensively speaking, the Cardinals, up until the Virginia Tech game, and the Cardinals after the Virginia Tech game, seemed like 2 different defenses. Now, they battled some injury. You had Jarvis Brownlee hurt, but they were healthy enough to understand that I don't think it was a personnel issue as to why they struggled as much as they did in the back half of the season. People will say it's personnel. I feel like it was more so scheme. My one major question for the defense heading into 2024, what is Ron English going to do differently in terms of playing style and scheme? Because something has to change. The secondary got burnt more often than not in the final 5 to 6 games of the schedule. Now, you could say, well, the team played good against Florida State. Well, you played against a third-string backup. So give the credit where credit's due, but you didn't play a fully healthy Florida State team. So take that for what you will. I think that something has to change. Maybe bringing MJ Griffin back into the equation, having Wesley Walker and Blake Ruffin and some other players. I think that, that would help the safety position. Getting Quincy Riley back definitely helps. But you could still tell that there was a scheme issue that I feel like needs to be addressed, needs to be corrected, because when the pass rush didn't get home in the back half of the schedule, you could tell that the secondary was vulnerable. They weren't making the stops that you could see them make in the first part of the schedule. Chris says we have to beat the weaker teams convincingly, had too many close games against bad teams. That could definitely go into consideration. Virginia, Indiana. I honestly thought Georgia Tech was a pretty solid team, so I'm not going to throw Georgia Tech into there. And NC State showed that they were pretty decent, but I'm looking at Virginia. I'm looking at Indiana. Miami, maybe they could have beat them a little or by more, but I don't really put that much into it. But Virginia and Indiana. But I do agree there that I think you do have to beat the weaker teams convincingly heading into next season. Defensively, like I said, I think it's a scheme change. I think something needs to happen in terms of the play calling. Offensively speaking, one thing that I'm interested in seeing is, does the change at quarterback and the change in style of quarterback change how Jeff Brohm calls this offense? Because I don't think that the offense that we saw last year is going to be the offense that we're going to be accustomed to seeing in a Jeff Brohm offense here in the 502. I think that Plummer, as solid as he was, had some limitations as a passer that sort of limited the amount of play calling that Jeff Brohm could utilize. I think with Tyler Shuck, who has the ability to be more mobile, has arm that can throw the ball down the field better, I think you're going to be able to open up the playbook more. Now, there's still going to be a commitment to running the football, and I think that there should be with Baby Bus, Penny Boone, Don Chaney Jr., Maurice Turner. But you brought Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey in for a reason. I think that it is an upgrade to the wide receiver position. I think the tight end position is upgraded. I think that the running back position is as good as it was last year. And the offensive line spot, yet to be seen, but personnel-wise, I feel like it's probably going to be comparable to 2023, potentially maybe a little bit better. So all across the board, I think the offense is going to be better on paper. Now, obviously, Tyler Shuck has to stay healthy, something he hasn't really been able to do the past 3 years. But if he's healthy, I think that, Brohm is going to be able to open up the offense to the likes of what we saw from him coaching at Western Kentucky and at Purdue, to where it was an exciting offense that threw the ball over the field. And I think that you're still going to have that professional, that pro-style offense, but it is going to, I feel like, be more conducive to explosiveness, especially downfield. Wide receivers, I feel like, are going to be better at creating separation, and Shuck is going to be able to be better throwing the ball downfield. So, perception, schedule, and scheme are the three things that I feel like could hold this team back. And what could hold this team back could also be used as a strength, but the bottom line is you don't have a ton of margin for error with this schedule, mainly being in the ACC. Because let me be honest, I could see a situation to where, let's consider two blind resumes. There's a 10-2 team from the Big Ten, 10-2 team from the ACC. Who's getting in? Big Ten, 10 times out of 10. Same with the SEC. If there's a 9-3 Big Ten team, 9-3 SEC team, compared to a 10-2 ACC Louisville team, then you're sitting in a little bit of trouble, right? So that's where the margin of error, and that's really where the perception comes into play that I feel like can hurt this team and this program. That's why it's sort of tricky to talk about the 12-team playoff, because there's a lot of opportunity. But make no mistake about it, making a 12-team playoff is still not going to be easy, because when is the last time that the Cardinals finished in the top 12 of any given season? I would argue into saying that maybe if I had to take a guess, what are we thinking, everyone? 2013, 14? Maybe when Louisville beat Miami in the Russell Athletic Bowl, I would probably argue in saying that they finished in the top 12. Maybe 2012, 13 after they beat Florida in the Sugar Bowl, they probably rose up maybe 10 spots. But it goes to show you that finishing in the top 12 is not going to be easy as maybe you thought that it might be. Robert says Louisville defense going to be better with the defensive backs. I agree. I think personnel-wise, I think you can make the case that there's an upgrade, but there still needs to be some sort of a scheme change, I feel like, in terms of putting the defensive backs in a better position to succeed. Now, I'm not a coach. I'm not going to act like I have all the answers, but that's just my line of thinking. But realistic outlook, and this might be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. I've seen a lot of optimism across the Twitter timeline, and there should be optimism. Make no mistake about it. But we also need to be realistic. And we're going to do that, or we're going to at least explain why you should here momentarily after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, Jase Medical. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but let's just talk for a second about preparing for real life. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial infections, including respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, and more. Visit Jase Medical and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be more prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your order. All right, heading into the final segment of the show, realistic outlook. That's the main thing. That's probably what you all are here wanting to know. Dalton, how realistic is Louisville? How realistic are the chances that the Cardinals make the 12-team playoff? Well, to be completely honest, it is well within the realm of reason that the Cardinals can make the 12-team. Chris mentions, really want to see what the young talent that we have on defense does next year. I agree. T. Will, hey, Pence, love the show. Do you think we add another wide receiver, or do you think anyone leaves? I appreciate that. To answer that quickly, I still think that there's an opportunity that we might lose a player at the position. I think if we do, we'll probably add another. If there's no other player that leaves, I think it's a little bit more challenging to predict. I'd probably say no, but it's up in the air. It really just depends on how many overall players leave around spring practice. So appreciate the question, though. But I definitely agree, Chris. I want to see what the young talent on defense has for next season. But back to the topic at hand, realistic outlook. For starters, it's well within reason to suggest that Louisville has an opportunity because we mentioned 11 weeks, or after 11 weeks last year, the Cardinals were right on the outside looking in for the 14 college football playoff with an opportunity to get to 11-1. They didn't do that, unfortunately, but they had the opportunity, and they were right there. In the schedule, even though it has a little bit more of a challenge overall, especially road games, I still feel like it's an opportunistic schedule that gives you the potential to make some noise in the ACC. But as I sort of started to discuss at the end of last segment, it's going to be challenging to get into the 12-team playoff. And I think that that's something that I would want to continue to hammer home on. 2 things are true at one time. It will have never been easier to make the playoffs than it will in 2024. Fact. 12 teams are allowed. Statistically, it's never been easier. Also, now this obviously isn't a statistical fact, but I think that it is safe to suggest that it's still extremely tough to finish in the top 12. No? Now, if Louisville doesn't lose the final 3 games of the season, potentially they do end up in the top 12. If they lose to Kentucky and beat Florida State, they're probably in the top 12. If they beat Kentucky and lose to Florida State, they're probably in the top 12. But it just goes to show you the margin of error is extremely, extremely slim for a team in the ACC. My thing, if you take anything away from this podcast, this live episode, whether you're watching live or you are listening after the episode is released, the number one thing that I want to say that I hope comes across pretty clear is that, in my opinion, Louisville fans should not go into next season expecting to make the playoff. That might be tough to say. Oh, Dalton, you're just sitting here and you're not optimistic and you don't have high sights on the season. Well, hell yeah, I do. I want to make the playoff. No, I'm sorry, guys. I don't want to make the playoff. I would rather honestly be 7-5 and, be in the Music City. But come on. I mean, you see what I'm saying? I just don't want to put this team into these expectations to where it's playoff or bust. Because you can have a 10-2 season ultimately and not make the playoff. You can have a 9-3 season and not make the playoff. But I do understand the devil's advocate saying that, well, the team won 10 games in 2023. Why can't they do the same in 2024? Definitely understood. My rebuttal to that would be, number one, tougher schedule. Number two, more road games, and the road games are tougher, so there's more opportunities to lose, and it's going to be tougher than 2023. So winning 9 games in 2024 is, honestly, in my opinion, as impressive as winning 10 games in 2023. That's just the way I look at it. So, personally, for me, I think we need to be hopeful that we can get to the playoff, but not necessarily say that it's playoff or bust. Because let's say this team wins 9 games next year. Does that mean that the season's a failure if you don't make the playoffs? I think year 3, you can have a conversation that maybe the expectation is to make the playoffs. But year 2, you're sort of continuing to get your guys into the program, and you have a tougher schedule. So it would make sense if you were to lose more than 2 games. And I'm not saying they will. I think that there's an opportunity that Louisville's better than they were last year. I'm not trying to say that it's not likely that they make the playoffs. I'm not trying to say that it's impossible. It's definitely possible. Is it likely? Is it probable? Is it possible? Damn right. So let's go into next season with a realistic approach. Optimism that you're going to be in contention for the playoff, but not viewing this season as a failure if you don't. Now, if you win 7 games, maybe that's obviously there's levels to it. So it's not necessarily black or white. You're sort of operating in the gray area. It's not one thing or the other. It's in that gray area. So that's just the case that I'm making, is just trying to reiterate how challenging it's still going to be with 12 teams. So a couple questions. Will Jimmy Callaway or Jaden Thompson, I figured, would maybe leave road games versus Clemson at Notre Dame. Do you think we get to the ACC championship game? Potentially Callaway or Thompson might leave. I thought that one of those guys could be a guy that ends up leaving, depending on how good Lacey and Corey Brooks end up being in spring practice. Do you think this is the new normal, Jeff Brohm nailing the portal every offseason? I think that it's going to be somewhat of a normal. I think that Louisville's going to try to be less and less dependent on the portal with the coming off seasons, but I still think the portal is going to be a very pivotal part of the off season and a pivotal part of roster construction, as it is going to be for every team. So the question, do you think that Louisville will get to the ACC championship game? I'm going to go out on a limb. I say that they do. I think that they're going to make it back to the ACC championship game. So that is just my thoughts. But just a heads up, I will be out of town beginning tomorrow. I'm going to release a football portal recruiting episode later on this evening. Talk about the commitment from Jaleel Skinner. We'll talk about why I feel like Louisville needs to prioritize 2024 edge rusher Noah Carter, while also diving into a weekly mailbag. So I will be out of town until Thursday afternoon. I'll have another episode then. Ryan Griffin, shout out to my guy joining the show tonight. I have no doubts that we'll make the playoffs. We'll put a more dynamic team on the field. I agree. I think on paper this team is going to be better. You bring back some very talented players, get guys back from injury, like MJ Griffin. And I think I'm going to make the case that Louisville has a very good chance to make the playoffs. So if the 12-team playoff, if you took the 2023 team and 2024 team, I think the 2024 team is going to be a better team. I'm just trying to make the case that national perception and a tougher schedule could hold this team back. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying it could. So let's be optimistic. Let's also be realistic in suggesting that if this team were to go 9-3, I don't think that that's a bad season either. So, but that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Thanks everyone for tuning into the live episode. Thanks to everyone tuning into the episode after the show is released. Everyone have a great day. Have a great night. Stay warm. Stay safe. We'll see you right back here very soon. Go Cards.